You know that feeling, right? You pick up your phone for just a second and suddenly an hour has completely vanished. Well, you are definitely not alone. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on the psychological playbook that keeps us all glued to our screens. It's a deep dive into how our own brains are being used against us. Our guide for this journey comes from a really eye-opening article in the January 2026 issue of George magazine. It basically lays out the entire playbook, all the mechanisms that social media platforms and influencers use to get us hooked. And we're going to walk through it, step by step.
And look, this isn't some fringe idea. This is serious. The U.S. Surgeon General himself has issued a really stark warning, basically saying that the risks for young people online have become a major public health crisis.
Okay, so here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll look at who's most at risk. Then we're going to get into the fascinating brain science that makes these apps so tough to put down. After that, we'll see how this science is literally built into the apps themselves, what we're calling the architecture of addiction. And finally, we'll talk about the real price we pay for all this so-called connection. Let's do it.
So just how big of a deal is this, really? Well, when you start looking at the numbers, they are pretty shocking.
Get this, a staggering 95% of teens from 13 to 17 are on social media. Not just on it, but on it every single day. That's almost the entire teenage population living a huge part of their lives online.
And it's starting way, way younger. The data shows that 40% of kids between 8 and 12 are already daily users. I mean, just think about that for a second. At such a critical time for brain development, they're being plugged into these incredibly powerful psychological systems.
And here's where it gets really serious. The Surgeon General's report found a direct link. See this? Adolescents who spend more than 3 hours a day on social media have double the risk of showing symptoms of depression and anxiety. That's not a coincidence. It's a clear, measurable impact.
So, what's the secret sauce? How do these platforms get such an incredibly powerful grip on us? Well, it all starts by hacking the most basic wiring in our brains, the parts that control motivation and reward.
Okay, here is the first, and maybe the biggest secret from the playbook. We've all been told that dopamine is the pleasure chemical, right? Turns out that's a huge misunderstanding. Dopamine isn't about pleasure, it's about anticipation. It's the chemical that says, I want that, not I like this. It's what drives us to seek things out.
Now, influencers and creators are masters at exploiting this, with something called the Zeigarnik effect. Basically, by teasing you with a piece of information but not giving you the whole story, they create what's called an open loop in your brain. Your mind just hates unfinished business, so it keeps you mentally hooked, waiting for that payoff.
And a super similar trick is the good old cliffhanger. When a video or a post ends on a dramatic, unresolved note, it lights up those exact same brain pathways. Your brain is practically screaming to close that loop, and that's what makes you crave the next post, the next video, that next hit of information.
So when you put all these techniques together, the effect is, well, it's profound. It shifts our behavior from being an intentional, conscious choice, I'm going to check my phone, to an unconscious, learned reflex. Scrolling stops being a decision and starts being a habit you don't even think about.
Okay, so now we know how our brains get hacked. But how is this science actually built into the design of the platforms we use every day? Spoiler alert, it is absolutely not an accident. It's a core feature. Right at the very heart of all this addictive design is a concept known as the slot machine effect. That George magazine article we're looking at calls this the single most powerful tool in the entire digital playbook.
So, this effect is powered by something psychologists call variable ratio reinforcement. Sounds complicated, but it's not. Think about it. When you pull down on your feed to refresh, you have absolutely no idea what you're going to get. It could be nothing, or it could be a viral video, a message from a crush, anything. Because that reward is so unpredictable, you just keep pulling the lever.
And there's a literal formula for this. Product designers use a 4-step process called the hook model to intentionally build these habits. It starts with a trigger, like feeling bored. That leads to an action, like scrolling. That delivers a variable reward, which we just talked about. And finally, it prompts an investment from you, like a comment, which sets you up for the next trigger. It's a perfect loop.
Now, it's not just the platform design. The creators themselves use a really powerful technique to make you feel connected. It's called a parasocial relationship. By talking directly to you, they create this incredibly convincing illusion that you're actual friends.
And here's where it gets kinda wild.
That feeling of connection, it isn't just in your head, it's biological. Your brain literally releases oxytocin, the same hormone that helps us bond with people we love. This makes you feel trust and safety, which in turn makes you way more open to whatever that influencer is saying.
Okay, we've seen the playbook, we understand the science, so what are the real-world consequences of these perfectly engineered platforms and relationships?
Well, the engine that powers so much of this is FOMO, the fear of missing out. It's that nagging, low-grade anxiety that someone, somewhere, is having a better time than you are. And it's a feeling that these platforms are specifically engineered to make you feel.
And platforms systematically weaponize this fear. Live feeds make you feel like you're already behind. The infinite scroll makes sure you can never, ever be caught up. Social comparison creates constant pressure. And things like stories that disappear create this urgent need to check in right now or miss it forever.
When you add all that up, this constant cycle of anticipation, comparison, and anxiety, it takes a huge toll. The research is crystal clear. It leads directly to lower self-esteem, it makes it harder to manage your own emotions, and it's tied to that spike in anxiety and depression we saw at the very beginning.
So, we'll just leave you with this one question. These platforms are not neutral tools. They are meticulously designed environments built from the ground up to capture and hold your attention. Now that you've seen the playbook, who's really in control when you scroll?